Everyone tells you the first week with your newborn is supposed to be sacred, quiet, magical. A time where the world slows down and nothing exists outside the soft cries and tiny breaths of that perfect little life you've brought home. But on our third morning as parents, the world didn't slow down. It crashed through my front door. The first sound I heard wasn't wood splintering. It wasn't shouting. It was my daughter's cry, sharp, piercing, and full of sudden terror. 3 days old, and already her perfect little world had been shattered. My eyes snapped open. Instinct kicked in before my brain could catch up. Then came the crack. The cheerful blue front door I'd spent a weekend painting flew inward, slamming against the wall so hard the drywall shook. A primal thought cut through my shock. I'm going to have to fix that. Then came the voice, shrill, smug, female. Child Protective Services. We have a warrant. Stay where you are. I moved before I thought, stepping between the door and my wife, Kylie. She sat bolt upright in bed, pale from the C-section she'd had just days ago, clutching the sheets to her chest. Pain flashed across her face when her stitches pulled tight. David, what's happening? She whispered. I didn't answer. I just raised a hand. Stay put, stay quiet. Heavy boots thundered down the hallway. Too many for comfort. They weren't trying to hide. They wanted us to hear them coming. They wanted fear to do the work before they even reached the bedroom. And damn it, it was working. The door flew open, and there she was, Karen Lowe, the Queen of Oakwood Creek, 20 years as HOA president, and she wore that title like royalty. Blonde helmet hair, blood-red lipstick, a smile that wasn't really a smile at all, but a blade. Behind her, 3 big men in mismatched tactical gear, looking less like professionals and more like overgrown mall cops who'd gone wild with a military surplus gift card. One had a gurney, another had a camera, its red recording light blinking like a warning. There they are, Karen announced, her voice dripping with manufactured concern for the camera. The unstable father, the incapacitated mother, and the helpless child. She pointed at me like she was delivering a guilty verdict. David Martinez, you are a danger to your family. We're here to rescue your daughter. That word, rescue, made my skin crawl. Karen whipped out a piece of paper, holding it like a trophy. This is a court order signed by a judge. We are taking custody of the child. Kylie clutched her stomach, tears spilling down her cheeks. Grace's cries filled the room, raw and desperate. You can't do this, Kylie's voice broke. She's 3 days old. She needs me. Karen ignored her completely. Get the baby. Bring the mother. She needs a psychiatric evaluation. 2 goons moved toward the bassinet. The third unfolded the gurney. The clank of metal legs hitting hardwood was the sound of a line being crossed. Something inside me, the part of me that had seen the worst humanity had to offer and sworn never to go back, burned away. They were not touching my wife. They were not touching my daughter. The bedroom transformed in my mind. This wasn't a room anymore. It was a battlefield. I counted threats, calculated angles, spotted weapons, an oak chair near the window, a heavy lamp on the nightstand. The 2 goons at the bassinet were clumsy. The third was distracted. And Karen stood too close. Get away from her, I said, my voice low, flat, and cold. They hesitated until Karen barked a laugh. Don't listen to him. I'll talk. Get the baby. The first goon reached for the bassinet. Time slowed. I saw Kylie's eyes widen. The red light of the camera blinked. My grip closed on the oak chair. I swung hard, connecting with the man's visor in a crack that sounded like a gunshot. Plastic shattered. He stumbled back, clutching his face. 1 down. Before the second could react, I rammed into him, shoulder first, knocking him off balance. His hand went for a taser. I twisted his wrist until bone ground against bone. He dropped to his knees, screaming. The third rushed me, but he was big and slow. I sidestepped, stuck my foot out, and sent him crashing to the carpet, 5 seconds, 3 down. Karen's smile vanished. The cameraman froze, still filming. "Get out of my house," I growled. Then, sirens. Not distant, right outside. Red and blue lights strobed through the window. 2 sheriff's deputies appeared, guns drawn. "Hands behind your head, now!" My stomach dropped. Of course, Karen had called them ahead of time, painted me as a violent threat. I glanced at Kylie, her face streaked with tears. Slowly I knelt, letting the cold bite of handcuffs close around my wrists. Karen's smirk returned. "See? Violent, unstable, just like I said." They wheeled Kylie out on the gurney. Karen reached for Grace, and I thought that was it. The moment I lost everything. But what Karen didn't know was that the cameras in my house weren't just recording. They were streaming. The cold bite of the cuffs was still on my wrists when they shoved me toward the front door. Karen was already on the sidewalk, clawing at Grace with one hand, while the cameraman kept pace for the hero shot she could blast across the neighborhood. Facebook page. Kylie's gurney rolled ahead, her eyes wide with terror, locked on me like she thought it might be the last time we'd see each other. Then, chaos. A black unmarked van screeched to a halt in front of my house, followed by 2 matte black SWAT trucks. But these weren't county deputies. The yellow block letters on their vests read Navy, and I knew them. Rick Downing, my old platoon mate, led the stack. They moved with precision. A flashbang erupted in the driveway, disorienting the fake, tactical goons. In seconds, Karen's phony raid unraveled. One of her hired thugs was face down in the grass under a SWAT knee. Rick ripped the court order from a bewildered deputy's hands. He took one glance, then looked at Karen. "This is a forgery." From his pocket, he pulled his phone and showed the senior deputy a live feed. My security cameras capturing every second of the break-in, every word of Karen's orders. "We also have," Rick said, voice flat and cold, "video of you admitting. There's no CPS case, plus financial records showing you took payment from this man's development company." He jerked his chin toward the pale cameraman, who looked ready to vomit. The cuffs came off my wrists. They went on Karen's. Her husband was picked up down the street. Every piece on her board fell in minutes. Kylie and Grace were loaded into. A real ambulance, safe now, but shaken. I stood on the lawn, chest heaving, watching the paddy wagon pull away with Karen inside. We'd won. Or so I thought. The next morning, Rick called. "You're not gonna like this," he said. "She's out." "What?" "She posted bond like it was pocket change. The DA's office is dragging its feet. Word is, Karen owns him. I didn't understand then, but I would. And when the first smear piece hit the internet, I knew she wasn't done. Local HOA president attacked by unstable veteran. They painted me as a ticking time bomb, twisted Kylie's postpartum exhaustion into severe mental instability. The article quoted anonymous neighbors, describing me as aggressive. The comments section was a feeding frenzy. It spread fast, too fast. This wasn't organic. Gossip. It was orchestrated. I'd fought enemies with rifles and explosives. But this was a war of perception. And I was losing. Kylie stopped answering the phone. Her hands shook when she held Grace. She'd sit for hours, rocking back and forth in silence. One night, she broke. "We have to move, David," she whispered. "Sell the house. Go somewhere she can't find us. It's not worth it. She's going to destroy us." And for a moment, I almost agreed. Running would be easy. Disappear, start over. Let Karen have the house, the street, the hollow victory. But I thought of the next family. The next couple she'd target. The next Michael, Fred's son, whose name I didn't know yet. And I knew running wasn't an option. The law wouldn't save us. Public opinion wouldn't save us. The only way to beat Karen Lowe was to burn down her entire empire. That night, I knocked on Fred's door. He poured me a whiskey, sat me in his living room, and stared at a framed photograph of a smiling young man on his mantel. "My son," he said quietly. "Michael." Fred's voice trembled as he told me how Michael's landscaping business had underbid Karen's cousin for an HOA contract. She never forgave him. The fines started small: parking violations, noise complaints. Then she withheld payments, buried him in legal threats. She bled him dry, Fred said, eyes wet. He lost the business, the house, everything. A week later, his voice cracked. He left a note with her name on it. That was the moment something in me locked into place. This wasn't petty neighborhood politics. This was targeted destruction, a pattern that had cost lives. Fred's gaze hardened. "Don't be sorry. Be smart. Don't let her do to you what she did to my boy. Fight her with everything you've got." I nodded. Everything. When I got home, I opened my old contacts list. My finger hovered over a name I hadn't called in years. Someone from another life. He picked up on the second ring. "It's been a while," he said. "Yeah, I need a favor. The kind we don't talk about on open lines." There was a pause. "Thought you were out of the game, Dave." They pulled me back in, and this time, it's personal. The call was just the first domino. His name in my old life was Echo, a ghost in the digital world, a master at making secrets appear and disappear. He didn't ask many questions, just listened as I laid it all out. The harassment, the forged warrant, the kidnapping attempt, the smear campaign. When I was done, he simply said, "Send me everything." So I did. Every violation notice, every time-stamped photo, every second of security footage from the cameras that had caught Karen's raid in perfect HD. My dossier went from my laptop to his encrypted server in under a minute. While Echo spun his web online, I started working on the ground. The HOA was Karen's kingdom, and every kingdom had a treasury. As a homeowner, I was legally entitled to inspect the books, so I sent a registered letter requesting a full audit. The response came faster than I expected. Not from Karen, but from her husband's law firm. The tone was sharp, condescending, and panicked, claiming my request was improper and burdensome. That was all the confirmation I needed. They were hiding something, and Echo? He wasn't knocking politely. He was already inside their system. What he found made my blood run cold. Karen had been using HOA dues as her personal piggy bank for years. Community funds funneled into a shell corporation under her maiden name. HOA money paying for her landscaping, her pool cleaning, even her property taxes. We were looking at hundreds of thousands stolen, and that was just the surface. The deeper Echo dug, the darker it got. The development company behind the condo project? A front for laundering money, not just for shady contractors, but for people whose names I recognized from military intel reports, names tied to organized crime. It clicked. Our little two-bedroom bungalow wasn't just in the way of a real estate deal. It was blocking a multi-million-dollar laundering operation, and in their world, removing obstacles wasn't personal. It was business. But the ugliest discovery wasn't about money. It was about power. Echo found a hidden, encrypted folder on Karen's personal computer. The file name was simple: insurance. Inside was a collection of blackmail material so extensive it could cripple half the city. A councilman's gambling debts, a building inspector's affair, a judge's hidden addiction, and then the district attorney's secret. Buried in the ledger was a decades-old hush payment covering up a hit-and-run committed by his father, an accident that had crippled a child. Suddenly, it all made sense. Why she got out on bail. Why the DA's. Office moved like it had concrete in its veins. She wasn't just well-connected, and she owned him. We had everything: embezzlement, laundering, blackmail, conspiracy. Enough to bury her and her husband for the rest of their lives. But we couldn't go to the locals. The DA would bury it. The city police worked too closely with his office. If we wanted justice, we had to leapfrog the entire state. The plan took shape fast. 3 simultaneous strikes. First, send the financial crimes to the IRS's criminal division. They couldn't be bought off by local politics. Second, feed the blackmail material to the same muckraking blogger who'd smeared me. Poetic justice. Let him destroy the very people who'd protected her. Third, the big one. Hand the kidnapping evidence and the laundering trail to the FBI's Public Integrity Section in Washington, D.C. It was risky. If Karen caught wind, she'd use her leverage to crush us before the first agent opened an email. For a week, my office became a command center. Echo's crew, men I'd served with, each an expert in their field, worked around the clock. Kylie noticed the light under my office door at all hours, the dark circles under my eyes. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She just looked at me with something I hadn't seen in weeks, a fragile kind of hope. By the end of that week, the fuse was built. The evidence packages were encrypted, timed to release in a perfect digital detonation. And then, a knock at my door. Late. Too late for a casual visit. I checked the camera feed and saw Fred on the porch, pale, tight-lipped, twisting his hat in his hands. I let him in. He didn't speak at first. Just sat in the armchair, staring at the floor like a man holding something heavy. "I haven't been completely honest with you," he finally said. What he told me turned everything upside down. Fred had been fighting his own war with Karen for nearly a decade. Patiently, quietly, he'd been collecting evidence, property records, corporate filings, whispered rumors from old contacts. He'd been building a case piece by piece, waiting for someone who could finish what he started. "That's why I pushed you," he admitted. "Why I told you where to look." Then he pulled something from inside his jacket. A small, worn, leather-bound book. The gold lettering on the cover was faded. "This," he said, handing it to me, "is the family Bible. Not scripture, a ledger, written in Karen's father's hand. Decades of bribes, threats, extortion. A history of corruption going back half a century. Flipping through, I found the DA's father's hit-and-run payment. I found names, dates, deals. This wasn't just a smoking gun. It was the whole arsenal. And in that moment, I knew our plan had to change, because Karen Lowe didn't just run the HOA, she owned the zookeeper. The moment I closed that ledger, I knew the plan we'd spent a week perfecting was dead. If we went through the IRS and the blogger first, we'd tip our hand. The DA, Karen's puppet, would see the walls closing in and bury anything that touched his office. The second he caught wind, she'd be gone. We needed the kill shot first. "We go over their heads," I said to Fred. "Straight to the feds in D.C. No state channels, no locals, no chance for anyone to tip her off." Fred nodded slowly. "Then you'd better move fast. She's arrogant, but she's not stupid. She'll feel you closing in." Echo had a contact, a woman he'd served with in his own shadow life, now in the FBI's Public Integrity Section. The kind of agent who didn't take calls from civilians, unless the right voice was on the other end. It was a long shot. But it was our only one. While Echo set up the meet, I thought about the one thing that could ruin everything. Time. We needed her pinned in place until the handoff was complete, and that's when the ugliest part of me, the part I thought I'd left overseas, woke up. I was going to bait her, not with weakness she could see through, but with weakness she wanted to believe in. I called an old Navy buddy who now practiced law in another state, told him exactly what I needed, the most humiliating, groveling settlement offer imaginable. It said I was unstable, that I'd overreacted, that I'd publicly apologized to her. In exchange, she'd drop all complaints and buy our house for the exact insulting price her developer had first offered. To anyone else, it would have looked too good to be true. But Karen Lowe wasn't anyone else. She was an egomaniac. The image of me crawling back to her, broken and begging, was irresistible. Her husband, sharper than she was, smelled a trap. But Karen overruled him. She wanted her victory in the open, with an audience. She set the meeting for the HOA community center. Perfect Kylie and Grace were already on a plane to my parents' place in another state, out of the blast radius. Fred set up in his house with binoculars and a clear line of sight to the community center parking lot. Echo sat on a secure line with the FBI, feeding them real-time updates. The feds were already en route. The night of the meeting, rain slicked the empty streets. The community center was cold, sterile, a tomb for all the lives Karen had ruined. Walked in alone. She sat at the head of a long table like a queen on a throne, her husband behind her, arms crossed. 2 new goons stood at the door, cheap suits stretched over wide shoulders. "Well, well, Mr. Martinez," she said, voice dripping with venom and delight. "I knew you'd see reason. Shame you had to drag your poor family through so much before admitting it." I didn't answer. Just stood there, letting her gloat. Every word was feeding the tiny microphone hidden in my collar, the live wire to the FBI van parked just down the block. She tapped the documents on the table. "You sign. Transfer the title. I make a call to my good friend, the district attorney. Maybe the charges disappear. It's amazing what cooperation can do." I tilted my head. "How do you know he'll listen?" She laughed, loud and ugly. "Oh, honey, people always listen when you know their secrets. Just ask his father. Or that pathetic old fool Fred. His son learned what happens when you—" "Don't!" My jaw clenched, but I kept my tone steady. "And the condos? All this for some real estate?" Her husband shot her a warning look, but she couldn't help herself. "The condos are just the beginning. They're a washing machine, Mr. Martinez. A beautiful high-end machine for making dirty money clean. And your little patch of dirt was the last piece of the puzzle." That was it. The full confession, extortion, blackmail, money laundering, and— She didn't even know she'd just signed her own sentence. She slid the pen toward me. The doors burst open, not with a shout. Not with chaos. 6 men and women in dark blue jackets with 3 gold letters on the back walked in like they owned the place. FBI. The lead agent, steel gray eyes, steady voice, didn't look at me. She didn't look at the goons. She looked only at Karen. "Karen Lowe, you are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and extortion." Handcuffs snapped onto Karen's wrists. Her face went slack. No scream, no fight. Just the shock of someone who'd never imagined they could lose. Her husband followed, arrested for money laundering and bribery. The goons froze, useless now, that the game was over. Through the rain-streaked window, I saw Fred's porch light blink twice, the signal. And just before they led her out, Karen turned. Our eyes met. Her hatred was absolute. The war was over. But monsters, even in cages. Stay monsters! 6 months later, the sound of rain on that community center roof felt like a dream from another life. Now the only sound on my street was the hum of a lawnmower in the distance, the laughter of kids racing bikes under the big oak tree in my front yard, and the creak of my porch swing. Grace was in my arms, heavier now, her tiny fingers curling around mine with absolute trust. She had Kylie's bright blue eyes and a smile that could melt steel. The house was ours, free and clear. The cloud that had hung over it for so long had been burned away by the kind of justice you can't fake, the kind backed by evidence so overwhelming it crushes every excuse. Karen and her husband had been denied bail. The ledger Fred had kept hidden for years, combined with her taped confession, had formed the spine of a federal indictment that read like a catalog of greed, racketeering, conspiracy, laundering, bribery, blackmail. The DA resigned in disgrace, before the trial even started. His office was gutted. The FBI's public corruption team dug deep and didn't stop until half the city government was gone. The empire Karen's father had built, the one she'd expanded and ruled for decades, collapsed in weeks, and the HOA, gone, dissolved by court order. For a while there was chaos, no rules about grass height, no notices about trash cans. People didn't know whether to feel relieved or panicked. But then something started to happen, something I hadn't expected. Neighbors started talking to each other, not through complaint letters or formal meetings, just talking. Over fences, on sidewalks, in driveways. They decided to form a new association. Voluntary. Simple common-sense guidelines about noise and parking, nothing else. No fines. No rulers measuring your lawn. Fred was named interim president. His first act? Tear down the old community center where Karen had staged her final victory. In its place, the neighbors pooled donations, many from families Karen had targeted, and built a community garden. At its heart, they placed a single stone bench. A brass plaque on the backrest read, "In memory of Michael and all those who deserved a better neighbor." I stood there the day it was unveiled, my daughter in my arms, watching Fred run his fingers across his son's name. His eyes were wet, but there was a light there, too. The first I'd seen since the night he'd handed me the ledger. Kylie was healing, too. She'd started therapy, and every week the brittle edges softened. The haunted look she'd worn since that morning was fading, replaced by real smiles, the kind that reached her eyes. One afternoon, she came out to the porch with 2 glasses of iced tea, handed me one, rested her hand on my shoulder. "It's quiet," she said, almost like she didn't trust it. "Yeah," I said, leaning back against her touch. "It is." We stayed that way for a long time, just breathing it in, the sound of normal life. The trials would still take years. The headlines would flare up every time Karen's name appeared in court. But the grip she'd had on this place, on all of us, was gone. The war was over, and in the quiet, I found myself thinking back to the question that had followed me from the first kick of that blue front door. How far will a man go to protect his own? I had my answer now. As far as it takes. You fight with fists when you have to. With cameras when they try to twist the truth. With secrets when the law is bent against you. You fight in the daylight and in the shadows, if that's what it demands, and you don't stop. Not until your family is safe. I hadn't wanted this war. I came to Oakwood Creek looking for peace. But peace, I learned, isn't something you find. It's something you build, and sometimes you have to burn down the old world to build a new one on the ashes. Now, holding my daughter, watching my wife laugh with a neighbor across the street, I knew every second of it was worth it. We were home, safe, and this time, it was for good. The first day of Karen's trial was nothing like the movies. No dramatic gasps, no sudden confessions. Just the slow, methodical march of evidence, piece by piece, until even the most loyal defenders in the gallery started shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Kylie and I didn't go the first week. We didn't have to. The FBI had everything. The ledger, the recordings, the bank records. Our testimony was on tape, clean and airtight. But by the second week, the prosecutor, a federal, one now, called us in. Walking into that courtroom was like stepping into enemy territory. Karen sat at the defense table in a navy suit that probably cost more than my first car. Her hair was perfect, her expression, pure disdain. When she saw me, the corners of her mouth twitched into something halfway between a smirk and a dare. Didn't give her the satisfaction. The jury watched the video of her breaking into my house. They saw the gurney. They heard her voice telling her goons to get the baby. And then they saw the meeting in the community center. Her bragging about laundering money, about the DA's secret, about Fred's son. The defense tried to spin it as hypothetical boasts. They called me a man prone to exaggeration, but the mountain of corroborating evidence crushed that strategy before it left the table. The biggest blow came when the IRS agent took the stand. In clipped, clinical terms, she explained the shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the missing HOA funds. Then she held up a check, HOA money, made out to Karen's personal gardener. Even the jury had to stifle laughs. But the most brutal moment wasn't about numbers. It was Fred. He shuffled to the stand in his Sunday jacket, the same one he'd worn to his son's funeral. His voice shook when he said Michael's name. But when he spoke about Karen, it hardened. She took my boy's future, he told the jury. Then she took his hope. And she didn't care. Not then. Not now. Not ever. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen didn't look at him. By the time Fred stepped down, you could feel the air in the room shift. She wasn't the queen bee anymore. She was just another defendant, trying to hide behind her lawyer's objections. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. The same outlets that had called me unstable were now calling her the face of HOA corruption. The smear piece about me was buried so far down in search results, you'd need a shovel to find it. Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid me now stopped to talk. Some apologized. Others brought food. A few just nodded. Quiet acknowledgments that they'd seen the truth for themselves. At night, Kylie and I would sit on the porch after Grace was asleep, listening to the crickets. She'd ask how I thought it was going. I think, I told her, that for the first time in a long time, we're not the ones on trial. But the trial wasn't just a legal reckoning. It was a public unmasking. The blackmail files Karen had kept so carefully hidden became evidence. And one by one, the names dropped into the public record. A councilman resigned mid-term. A building inspector retired for health reasons. A developer fled the state. The old HOA board, the two cronies who'd signed off on every violation notice, faced their own charges for aiding and abetting fraud. Oakwood Creek, for the first time in decades, was free of the rot that had been eating it from the inside. But freedom, I was learning, doesn't come without scars. Even with Karen in court every day, I still found myself checking the cameras at night. Kylie still jumped when the doorbell rang unexpectedly, and Fred, well, he'd gotten what he'd wanted for nearly a decade, but the victory didn't bring his son back. Some nights I'd see him on his porch, staring at the community garden, the plaque with Michael's name glinting in the moonlight. The trial stretched on, each day peeling away another layer of her empire. And every morning, I'd walk into that courtroom, not as a victim anymore, but as a reminder, to her, to the jury, to everyone, that I was still standing. Karen hated that. I could see it in her eyes every time we passed, and that alone was worth the walk. The 7th week of the trial started like all the others. Stale coffee, crowded benches, the slow grind of procedure. But there was a different energy in the air that morning. The prosecution's table was stacked with new folders. The lead, federal prosecutor, a woman with a calm, surgical way of speaking, wore a faint smile. Karen must have felt it too. She shifted in her chair more than usual, glancing back toward the gallery like she was trying to spot a threat. When the bailiff called the next witness, the room murmured. It wasn't another agent or accountant. It was one of her own. The wiry man with thinning hair and nervous hands was the cameraman from that morning, the one who'd filmed her kicking in my door. I'd last seen him looking like he was about to vomit into his viewfinder. Now he sat in the witness box, eyes darting between Karen and the jury. He didn't want to be there, that much was obvious, but his voice was steady when he swore the oath. The prosecutor started easy. Name, occupation, how long he'd known Karen. Then she slid a photo across the table. It was him, holding the camera in my bedroom, the red record light glowing. "Mr. Garrison," she asked, "was this part of your job as a videographer?" He hesitated. "Not exactly." "What was your job that day?" "To make it look real," he said finally. "Like we were saving a child from dangerous parents." The prosecutor let that hang in the air before she leaned forward. "And who instructed you to do that?" His voice dropped. "Karen Lowe." From there, the story tumbled out. How she'd paid him in cash, double his normal rate, to be there that morning. How she'd given him lines to feed the narrative. How she'd told him the court order was fake, but that no one would question it once the footage hit social media, and then the kicker. How she'd boasted afterward that it didn't matter if the police knew it was staged. "They work. For me," she'd said. The jury leaned in. The defense tried to paint him as a disgruntled contractor, but the prosecutor was ready. "Mr. Garrison," she said, "are you here under subpoena?" "Yes." "Have you been granted immunity from prosecution in exchange for your testimony?" "Yes." "Have you provided the FBI with the original, unedited footage from that day?" His answer was a quiet but devastating yes. You could feel the shift in the room. This wasn't just my word against hers anymore. This was her own hired help pulling the rug out from under her. Karen didn't look at him. She stared straight ahead, jaw locked, one manicured hand clutching the edge of the defense table. But the prosecution wasn't finished. They brought out one final piece of evidence, a recording pulled from a burner phone seized at her husband's office. The audio crackled, but her voice was unmistakable. "Doesn't matter how you do it, just make sure the kid's in the shot. Crying if possible." I felt Kylie's hand tighten around mine. The jurors' expressions hardened. The defense objected, argued about context, chain of custody, anything to dull the blade. But the judge overruled. The recording stood. By the time court recessed for the day, Karen's mask had cracked. She kept her head down, avoiding the cameras outside, letting her lawyer run interference. I caught a glimpse of her in the hallway as we left. Not the smug HOA queen, but a cornered animal. Fred was waiting. By the doors. "She's finished," he said simply. I wanted to believe it. But I'd learned something about people like Karen. They don't accept defeat. They look for cracks, for loopholes, for one last way to twist the knife. The verdict wasn't in yet, and until it was, I wasn't taking my eyes off her. Verdict day. The air in the courtroom was heavy, like everyone was holding their breath at the same time. The gallery was packed, reporters with cameras ready, neighbors who'd lived under Karen's thumb for decades, a few strangers who just wanted to watch the queen fall. Kylie sat beside me, Grace at home with my parents. Fred was on my other side, his hands folded on his cane. We didn't talk. There was nothing left to say. The jury filed in, each one avoiding Karen's gaze. "Madam, foreperson," the judge said. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." She handed over the papers. The judge read them aloud, each count slicing through the room like a clean blade. Guilty. 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 Racketeering, fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, extortion, attempted kidnapping. The last one made the room stir. People glancing at me, at Kylie, at Fred. It wasn't just numbers and paperwork anymore. It was real. Karen didn't flinch. Not at first. She sat perfectly still, lips pressed together, eyes locked straight ahead. But when the judge remanded her into federal custody, no bail pending sentencing, something in her cracked, a small twitch in the corner of her mouth. Her hand tightened on the table, the only sign that the walls were finally closing in. Her husband got his verdict next, guilty on every count tied to the laundering scheme. His shoulders sagged. As the marshals cuffed them both, Karen turned her head just enough to find me in the crowd. Her eyes burned with the same black hatred I'd seen that night in the rain. But this time, she was the one being led out, and for the first time since this started, I didn't look away. The sentencing came a month later. Karen got 35 years in federal prison. Her husband got 25. The judge called it a staggering abuse of trust and power. Outside the courthouse, Fred stood in the sun, eyes closed for a moment, as if trying to feel what freedom really felt like. "You did it," he said. "No," I told him. "We did it." The weeks that followed felt strange. Oakwood Creek was quiet, but not the brittle, tense quiet of before. Kids played in yards without their parents glancing nervously toward Karen's house. Neighbors waved to each other. The garden, in place of the old community center, bloomed early that spring. Rows of tomatoes, peppers, marigolds, and in the center, that stone bench with Michael's name. Fred visited it often. Sometimes I joined him, Grace on my lap, the two of us just sitting there in the soft morning light. Kylie's laugh came easier now. The shadows under her eyes faded. She'd walk Grace down the street to visit neighbors, stop to chat, and not once look over her shoulder. And me? I still checked the cameras at night, still kept the security system running, the recordings backed up off-site. Old habits die hard. But the feeling was different now. Not fear, not tension. Just vigilance. One warm afternoon, I was back on. The porch swing, Grace in my arms. She was smiling. A big, toothless grin that made the months of hell worth it. Kylie stepped out with 2 glasses of iced tea, handed me one, and sat beside me. "It's peaceful," she said. "It is," I answered. "We stayed that way for a while. Just listening to the world we'd fought for, because that's what it had been. A fight. A war, even. One I never wanted, but one I'd wage again in a heartbeat. How far will a man go to protect his own? As far as it takes. You fight with fists when they're at your door, with cameras when they twist the truth, with secrets when the system's against you, and you keep fighting until your family is safe. Peace isn't something you stumble onto. It's something you build, brick by brick, choice by choice, and sometimes you have to burn the rot away to make room for it. Looking out at my street, at my wife's easy smile, at my daughter's curious eyes, at the neighbors tending, to a garden planted in memory of those who came before, I knew. The war was over, we were home, and this time it really was for good. You've heard this confession. Now wait until you hear the next one.